I went into publishing as a result of being made the editor of the school magazine when I was 16. And then following that, when I went to university, I was editor of the university newspaper. Subsequent to that, I have worked 50% of my life in academia and 50% in other institutions like the British Film Institute or UNESCO in Paris or the BBC. But most of the time, publishing has been part of my activities. And then in 1988, I was approached by, oddly enough, a medical publisher who was interested in moving into media publishing, and he asked me to set up a media wing for him, which I did, and I then proceeded to, the next decade, sell that for him to a university, and it became a university press. Now, I mentioned 88 as being significant because I think that's the year that Intellect was founded, and we went along parallel lines without knowing each other for quite a long time. But I met Masood in the early 21st century, and he invited me to join the Intellect team, which at that time I wasn't in a position to do because I was employed elsewhere. But when I retired, I said, yeah, I'd love to come and join the team, and that's what I've done. And I now work with Intellect in terms of finding authors and journals and generally as a sort of an associate publisher of the house. The next question about has my academic background helped or hindered me working with authors is a strange one really, because I did English literature at university, which was, as far as I'm concerned, a complete waste of time and led nowhere. And I wasn't even interested in particular in English literature. I became very interested in cinema. And as a result, I was one of a very small group of people back in the late 60s and the early 70s in the UK who tried to create something called originally film studies, which became television, film and television studies, and eventually media studies, which of course has now taken over and is a major area in academia across the country. Not that I particularly agree with or approve of what passes under the rubric of media studies these days, but that's another issue. But it's helped me, so the media side of things has helped me working with authors because I've been lucky enough to be invited over most countries of the world to give papers and talks and so on. And as a result, I have a very large base of contacts of people who want to write, people who want to publish, and it means that I have a huge number of contacts, which hopefully some of whom I can feed into the Intellect project. How has the publishing world changed? Well, enormously. When I first started in the business when I was a kid at school, it was all hot metal, and we talked about things like linotype and monotype, and it was a complicated, very, very complicated, very technically specific area of work. The apprenticeship to be a linotype setter was, for example, 7 years. Now, with the advent of computers, all that has changed, and anybody basically can set type. It is not a specific skill anymore. And similarly, printing methods have changed. Instead of having the huge printing presses of the old days, the old Heidelbergs of Germany, we now have things like POD, print-on-demand machines, which are basically very sophisticated photocopiers. So printing has changed, the production side has changed immeasurably. As distribution, when I was young there were very few bookshops. You'd even have towns without a bookshop. Now there are bookshops everywhere, and despite the fact that Amazon and the internet has really also transformed the distribution of books, and it's now easy to just look up on a computer, find the book you want and order it to be delivered by post. Nevertheless, as I say, bookshops have really mushroomed, certainly in the UK. And so the publishing world has changed in every possible way in terms of production, distribution, and in terms of reading habits, I think, which will bring me on to the final question. Well, the first and obvious one in terms of academic publishing is that the big publishers like Macmillan, Routledge and Sage are not really interested anymore in publishing the sort of books that we publish, because they want to publish only really readers and and textbooks. That is to say, they want to publish books that you can stack high in the bookshop and which students will buy for their courses, because that's where the money lies. They're not interested in publishing what I would call individual monographs, specialist books, such as we do, because there isn't a huge market for them in the same way. And this is ironic, because in the British university system, which is not so dissimilar, I think, from the rest of the English-speaking world, there is increasing pressure on academics to publish through what we call the research assessment exercise. But textbooks and readers are not valid under the research assessment exercise. So academics have got to publish their own work. But that's very difficult. So it's only the small specialist publishers like Intellect that are prepared to take on this sort of publishing. I think the other thing that makes Intellect stand out from even the other small publishers is that it has an absolute commitment to publishing new original work. Masood, the managing director, is very clear about the fact, to give one example, he's not keen on publishing PhDs. It's not to say that he won't, but he's not keen on it because he wants more innovative, more path-breaking, more groundbreaking work to publish than you would normally find in an academic PhD. So I think Intellect is a very important and a very interesting and actually a unique publishing house, and one that I'm very pleased to be part of.